At what point does it make sense to just leave your workplace, right?
Yeah, so I think it's going to depend. You should do an assessment and take inventory of what are my financial obligations? Am I a caretaker? Who's depending on me? Is someone on my insurance? Do I have dependents that are relying on my health insurance? Is there another party? If I'm married, can I use my partner's health insurance? And so many. Do I have a non-compete agreement that prohibits me from leaving this particular organization? So what are the restrictions on my employment? So those are just some things to think about as you're thinking about, is it now time to leave?
Hey, if you're getting value from this content and you haven't done so already, be sure to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel and podcast, and be sure to subscribe to the MHT newsletter. That way you don't miss out on any new content as it's released. Links in the description. Let's go. One of the biggest challenges with mental health is the workplace. Some people have trouble getting back into the workplace after being on leave or disability. For others, it's when they first start experiencing mental health issues and then they start having to take medical leave and worry about those issues. Well, if you or anyone you know is struggling with workplace stress due to mental health or other disabilities and you're trying to navigate those muddy waters, you're in the right place. Stick around because today we are talking with expert attorney, award-winning attorney, Jessica Childress, the author of Peace, Leaving a Toxic Workplace on Your Own Terms. Ms. Childress has practiced employment law for over 11 years, representing organizations of all sizes and individuals in employment law matters. She is the managing attorney of the Childress Firm PLLC, boutique employment law firm based out of Washington, D.C. Among other accolades, she has been the recipient of several honors, including the National Bar Association's 2018 Young Lawyer of the Year Award, the Washington Bar Association's 2018 Young Lawyer of the Year Award, the National Bar Association 40 Under 40 Best Advocates Award, the Kim Keenan Leadership and Advocacy Award, the Greater Washington Area Chapter of the National Bar Association's Rising Star Award, and recognition by the National Black Lawyers as one of the top 100 Black attorneys. So, without further ado, let's meet Jessica. Hey, Jessica, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Patrick. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm sure my intro doesn't do you nearly enough justice. For anyone who wants to see your full bio, be sure to check out the show notes in the podcast or the blog, and you'll see she has quite a wealth of experience over, 11 years in practice?
Over 11 years of practice,
wow.
Yes, that's right.
That is fantastic. Wow, I'm so excited to have you on today because this is such a hot topic in the mental health wellness space for everybody, not just mental health, but when it comes to issues with employment around medical disabilities, mental health struggles, all of the reasons that we start getting heat in the workplace around personal issues. It's just such a vast topic, and it's such a personal and heart-wrenching topic, right? Because it really affects us at the core. It affects families, it affects couples, it affects everybody, children, when we start having not just the stress of mental health or physical issues, but then the added stress of our careers, our employment, and how to take the next steps, and knowing when things get funky, what the next legal implications are, next steps. And so super excited to have you on today to share your wisdom around this super important topic.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm really happy to share. As you mentioned, employment is really at the core of what we all do. It's a part of our being. So anytime that you are dealing with a workplace issue, it's going to affect your life overall. And so I'm certainly happy to share just my insights on navigating toxic workplaces and things to consider when you're determining whether or not to leave.
Oh, thank you so much for that. And just for anyone who wants to learn more about you, if you don't make it all the way through this interview, as I know many of you don't, there is her website you definitely want to check out. Did I pronounce your last name right? Childress?
That's right.
Childress, thechildressfirm.com. You can see a lot about her background here, her education. She's been seen in Forbes, Good Morning America, Entrepreneur Magazine. Just so much going on here. And if you want to check out her book, it's also available in Kindle at this juncture for Amazon for Kindle. Your hard copy is rolling out later this year, next year.
Pre-order right now, and so the ebook will be available at the end of January, and the hard copy will be available later in 2024.
Awesome. So, guys, keep your eye out for that. That'll be a definite tool for your toolbox because this is, like I said, an area that anybody can get hit in when it comes to your mental health. So, be sure to have that in your bookshelf. Super important. All right. So, let's jump in. Jessica, you want to share a little bit about how you got into this specific space? Because I know you've covered so much in your experience as an attorney. What led you into this particular space?
Sure. So, Patrick, I've always wanted to be a civil rights attorney. I think I was the kid on the playground advocating for fairness, no bullying allowed on my playground when I was,
No pushing
in
on the slide, right?
kindergarten.
Everybody take your turn.
I was very much just someone who believed in the idea of justice throughout my
Yeah.
life. And so that naturally led me to law school. When I was in an undergrad, I was on the Judiciary Committee at UVA, and UVA, the University of Virginia, is where I went to undergrad, and also where I went to law school. And so just always believed in principles of justice and fairness. And so after law school, I clerked for a federal judge. So I was able to see a variety of cases come through the federal courthouse, and employment law just really spoke to me. I was lucky enough to get a law firm job after clerking and went into the employment law department for a large law firm, only representing companies. And so that was just really awesome to be able to get that perspective, helping companies become more compliant, answering day-to-day questions that arose in the workplace, and really getting my feet wet in the employment law arena by being a big law firm attorney. And so I just really did love employment law because the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is the preeminent civil rights statute, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of a number of categories, including race, national origin, pregnancy, disability, religion. So that is the preeminent civil rights statute. So that was really what I was working with, and state analogs to that statute. So I really did feel like I was someone who was enforcing justice. Even representing only companies, I felt like I was at least making sure that companies understood what their rights and obligations were. I eventually left a large law firm and started my own practice where I represent now both companies and individuals. I provide anti-harassment trainings to companies, teaching them how to make sure that their workplaces are safe and respectful. So that's really my journey. That was my career journey. But I got into the journey really because it's specifically in employment law because I love the idea of civil rights and making sure that everyone feels protected. And in the workplace, if you think about where you spend your time and what you spend your time doing, I can speak for myself when saying I think I spend the most time working. For
Mm-hmm.
better or for worse, I spend the most amount of my time working. So when you are spending an exorbitant amount of time doing one thing, your rights are most likely to be affected in that place where you're spending your time. And as working people, your rights are most likely to be affected in the workplace, not driving, not driving, not spending time with your friends, but really working. And so for me, it was so important. It always has been so important that the spaces where people are spending the most amount of time are safe places.
Wow, very well said. Absolutely. I mean, yes, where we oftentimes make our friends, where we sometimes meet our spouse. We spend a lot of time, in the workplace. That's a lot of our identity. And yeah, like you said, a lot of where we can catch heat too, right?
Indeed.
Because that is where we're mostly invested, right?
Absolutely.
So, wow. And I know you have your own firm now, right?
I do.
So, wealth of information. I think I neglected to mention on your website, you have a blog as well,
I do.
which
I
touch
do.
on a lot of important topics.
Indeed. Indeed. Thank you.
Yeah, that's right here on the website. Anybody who missed that at the top.
Oh, no
So,
worries.
blogs are, I think, just an amazing resource because you can search by topic on websites. You can just a wealth of information there, right? We push books a lot of the time, but blogs are, snippets of wisdom that just, we don't want to drive past. So super
Thank
cool.
you. Thank you
Yeah,
for highlighting it.
absolutely. So when it comes to the workplace, what are some of the common hurdles you see people encounter when it comes to rights, knowing when to ask for help, right? Where do we catch snags, do you think?
Sure. Well, I think that, thank you for asking, Patrick. I think one of the biggest hurdles is that people feel like they don't know. They don't know what's right, what's wrong. Something might feel off, and they just don't know whether it's something that is a legal violation or not a legal violation. And I think it's really important to understand the difference between toxicity and then something that's actually unlawful harassment, something that creates an unlawful hostile work environment. And those definitions are really what we call in the law legal terms of art. So, hostile work environment, that is a legal term of art that's given meaning by case law. And so, the laws that judges decide upon, that's case law. And judges give judicial interpretations and judicial meaning to the word hostile work environment. And under the federal law, the conduct at issue has to be severe or pervasively bad to be considered a hostile work environment. So there is a severe and pervasive requirement. So if you're going into work every day, your boss tells you, "Hey, I want to review every email that you send out before you send it." That in and of itself is probably going to be very annoying. It feels like
Mm-hmm.
micromanaging.
Yeah, nobody likes that.
No one likes that, right? No one wants to be micromanaged. People want to feel like they have autonomy. That could create, in and of itself, a really uncomfortable work environment for someone. But in order to be considered a hostile work environment, and I think all of us have heard that term before, it's thrown around pretty casually. But in order to be considered a hostile work environment, the behavior has to be tied to a protected category. And I mentioned just a few minutes ago what are considered protected categories under the federal law. Some states protect more than what the federal law protects. But at its core, hostile work environment has to be severe and pervasive misconduct tied to a protected category under the federal law in order to be considered hostile work environment harassment. Now, we talk about toxic work environments, and that's different. A toxic work environment doesn't have to be illegal. It could just be toxic, asking every day about asking your boss, asking you every day to let them see your emails before you send them out. That's going to be probably over time, it's going to affect someone's sense of confidence. It's probably going to create something toxic, a toxic environment for them. But in and of itself, on those very simple facts that I laid out, that's not necessarily going to be considered harassment. That's unlawful. So that person who's working in that environment, what do they do? Right? How do they know? They probably feel uncomfortable, and they probably
Mm-hmm.
don't know what that behavior actually is. Is it unlawful? Is it not? It's making me feel bad. My boss micromanages everything I do. My sense of confidence is eroding because I'm being asked to do this every day, but I'm not being discriminated against. I'm not being retaliated against, but my environment, it's really awful. I don't like going to work because I feel like I don't have the autonomy to do my job. So that is where there is a lot of tension because people don't know if conduct is unlawful or whether it's okay, but then they just have to endure. So what can they do in those circumstances? That's the question that many, many people come to me asking. Well, first, is this unlawful? And then what can I
Mm-hmm.
do? And I think communication is very important even if something's not unlawful, to let your supervisors know that their behavior is making you uncomfortable. Because organizations don't want toxicity, because toxicity can over time lead to a hostile work environment if the elements of discrimination or harassment based on a protected category then arise. So, making sure that you are transparent with your supervisors and with your colleagues about how you're feeling in the workplace. It seems very simple, but it's often very difficult because it's a hard thing to do to speak up for yourself and to
Oh
advocate
yeah,
for yourself.
terrifying for many.
So,
And worry about retaliation and alienation, and I mean, just all kinds of problems can stem from being the squeaky wheel. Because you're
indeed.
probably not the only one in a lot of cases. And you're touching on something I was really curious about, because there's times when, as employees, you can feel maybe that you're being micromanaged to an extreme, or you suspect that maybe some of your rights are being stepped on. But how do you know when it's an appropriate time to report workplace misconduct, discrimination, harassment, bullying? Where is that line, and how does one know what are the next steps if they suspect that's what's going on?
Yeah. So everyone should receive, if you're working for a company really of any size, you should have an employee handbook. I mean, that is
Mm-hmm.
really what you should start off with. That's a best practice for employers to always have an employee handbook or an employee manual that outlines what the company's internal reporting policies are. And it should be very clear, very clearly defined by the company as to what constitutes discrimination, harassment, retaliation, a code of conduct violations. And so, code of conduct violations that could actually encompass some of that toxic behavior that I talked about. So, behavior that's not necessarily unlawful, but still behavior that the company simply doesn't tolerate. So, that's where I would start, is by looking at your employee manuals to determine, okay, is this behavior that my company allows? Is this behavior that's inconsistent with my company's values? And it's if the company has a manual, that is going to be outlined in clear terms, or as clear as possible, right? And so that's really where you should start, just by understanding. Number one, I think it's affirming for an employee to see that their company has written out that they don't tolerate certain things. So you
Mm-hmm.
going back to that particular manual and reminding yourself, or even informing yourself for the first time, if you never reviewed those policies in detail, what the behavior that's allowed by your company, what that is. And then it's important to understand what the internal and external reporting policies are. Your company may have an internal person, usually a supervisor. And if it's not a supervisor, it could be someone else within HR that you should report to, or it could be an external company to report to if if there are violations that you witness that you'd like to report and that you'd like the company to take action upon. So starting there, if there is no policy that you can access, if you don't know where your manual is, or you never seen it before, asking HR where it is. HR should be able to give you a
Ah,
copy.
yes.
It should
HR
be,
is a resource, right?
yeah, use
Human
them as a
resources. Yeah.
resource. That's what HR
Okay.
is for. And
Yeah.
so that's where I would start, finding out what behavior is actually acceptable. And then following that internal reporting policy. If you feel like you are afraid to follow that policy, if you have looked at it, you realize something's awry here, or if you just know something after consulting with an attorney or just doing your own research and you know something is unlawful, then you can still report to your supervisor. Let them know, hey, this is something that I've experienced, and the company can address, depending on what the circumstances are, the company can take remedial action as appropriate. So I think a best practice is to start with the policy. For whatever reason, those policies may not be available, or you may be afraid to ask for them. But you should always feel empowered, I think, to speak up and to report something that you do not feel is consistent with the company's values. And so if you're feeling like you're being micromanaged, it's important to let your supervisor know. And if it's not your supervisor that you feel comfortable reporting that conduct to, or if you feel like you're being singled out for whatever reason, discriminated against for whatever reason, retaliated against, you should report it and speak to HR, speak to whomever within the company's executive. It could be, the director of HR, it could be an HR manager, but speak to whomever is responsible for addressing those particular HR issues and follow the process. If you feel like you're afraid, I think that's to speak up on behalf of yourself, I think, or you're just trying to understand what your rights are, then it's important to speak with an employment attorney to determine, okay, like this something really bad has happened. Maybe I need to speak with an attorney. I don't feel comfortable
Mm-hmm.
speaking up on behalf of myself, or I really do need to understand more about what my rights are. There may be a violation that you believe really requires legal action. And in that particular circumstance, I think it's really important to speak with an attorney. There are certain claims that require you to file a claim within the statute of limitations, so by a certain deadline. So it's important to, if you think a legal violation has occurred, understand what the timelines are that dictate when you actually have to file a claim with your Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is the federal agency that enforces civil rights violations. I live in DC. I practice in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. So there are state agencies that have their own statute of limitations. So it's important to understand what those are and comply strictly with those deadlines.
Good to know. Because, and it's always good to be educated, right? If you don't know, there's no harm in getting educated around those things. You don't want to shoulda, coulda, woulda situation where you're like, oh
Indeed.
man, I missed the boat on that, and it really hurts, in some cases more than others. Um,
Indeed. So if
and
you
so you
are
can file a complaint, but it's also good to maybe, if you don't have an internal advocate like a union rep or something like that, then maybe, you know, reaching out to an employment attorney to get some facts straight. Never hurts to get a consult, right?
Indeed, indeed, because there may be facts that you don't think are
Mm-hmm.
relevant that are relevant to,
Mm-hmm.
and a case could turn on one or two facts. So things that you don't think are relevant could actually be relevant when you are filing a claim, and things that you think are relevant might not actually be relevant.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right before you go to battle too, maybe even before you file a formal complaint, maybe vice versa, get a consult first, and is this worth pursuing? Am I within
indeed.
bounds? Is it worth kicking up dust? Over kind of thing.
And I think that
Yeah.
that's really, really valuable to understand, is this worth really putting my time and resources into? If it's just a bad manager, the law doesn't protect just bad
Mm-hmm.
management without anything else. So if if there's protected activity, so retaliation is another term of art. If an employee files a complaint internally or externally, then later suffers from an adverse action that is what's called in close temporal proximity. So,
Hmm.
that happens closely in time to the protected activity, there could be an inference of retaliation. And so, it's important for a third party, a lawyer, to really understand the chronology of events that's happened. So, I often ask when I'm evaluating a new case, well, have you ever filed a complaint against the company?
Mm-hmm.
And when did you file the complaint? What was it based on? Who did you file the report? Who knows about the report? With whom did you file it? And then I want to know what happened, everything that happened after that, because that's going to allow me to do an assessment as to whether any potential retaliation has occurred. So it's important that the employee themselves, if they are meeting with an attorney, have really detailed records of what they've done. So, they can just, take notes, and they can, if they filed a complaint internally, just note when they filed that complaint, so that when they talk to their attorney, they can understand, or when they do an initial consultation, the attorney really has all the facts they need to give
Right.
a
To make a
proper
case.
assessment of the claim.
Yeah. So definitely having a paper trail, having your dates in order, making sure that you're not just going to write it on a steno pad like this and then lose it. Having something concrete that you use, some kind of system. So if you're going to put in that kind of work, don't take half measures. Definitely dot your I's, cross your T's, and make sure that you have that information for potentially an attorney who might need to give you good advice, direct feedback. You want to make sure you have those things in order, right?
Indeed.
I do. Right. So that's the preliminary steps. But what about the opposite side of the spectrum when somebody's like ready to throw in the towel and be like, this isn't worth I can't do this. It's too emotionally taxing. I'm already struggling with X, Y, or Z. At what point does it make sense to just leave your workplace, right?
Yeah, so I think it's going to depend. You should do an assessment and take inventory of what are my financial obligations? Am I a caretaker? Who's depending on me? Is someone on my insurance? Do I have dependents that are relying on my health insurance? Is there
Hmm.
another party? If I'm married, can I use my partner's health insurance? And so many. Do I have a non-compete agreement
Mm.
that prohibits me from leaving this particular organization? So, what are the restrictions on my employment? So, those are just some things to think about as you're thinking about, is it time? Is it now time to leave? And there's just an analysis that you should personally take. There's no right answer or wrong answer, but when you're looking at, how is this workplace affecting me on an everyday level? Is my mental health at stake? Is it, and I think that this is more within your wheelhouse, Patrick, as to at what point does your mental health care provider tell you you know
Hmm.
there's nothing you really need to like change your circumstances? So being in close consultation with any doctors, with any mental health providers who can give you an assessment of how this is affecting you mentally and physically. But then on a practical level, beyond the mental and physical health components, looking at your financial obligations, looking at whether you like, if there's a possibility for you to go to another place that might be healthier for you on a day-to-day level. Will you have to move in order to work there? Are you able to move at that time? So I think once you know every single day that you really can't tolerate this work environment anymore, and it's really taking a toll on your life holistically, I think then it's time to really do that assessment. It's
All
time to do
right.
the assessment as to whether
Yeah.
what practical steps do I need to consider before leaving.
Yeah. And on the same vein, I'm wondering, so what are the other options if somebody is considering leaving? Like, what should they consider before they pull the trigger on that, do you think?
Sure. So if they're number one, I think you should have a conversation with your superiors, with HR before leaving, to determine if there's another department that you can work in. Is if your organization is large enough, you may be able to go to another department, work under a different supervisor, work with a different team, changing the circumstances that would allow you to continue to work within the organization in a healthy way. So that's one potential option. If the organization is amenable to it, asking to take some time for administrative leave, if the organization is amenable to it, if you are undergoing a health situation, if you are dealing with a major health situation that requires you to take time, you should look at the Family and Medical Leave Act to determine if there's any time that you can take off to mend to and address your mental or physical condition. And so that's a potential avenue to allow you to address any health concerns. So if that's the case, you need to be in close compliance with the Family and Medical Leave Act, making sure that you understand the requirements of that act. So that there's a potential there. So those are some potential possibilities to consider before just saying, okay, I'm actually leaving the organization.
Wow. Well said. So a lot to consider, between what your options are, and that's going to vary, right? By
Indeed, it's
employer,
going
by
to vary.
profession, right? By benefits package and the whole thing, right? And so, uh, where does severance pay come into this picture? You can talk a little bit about severance pay and maybe if that's a specific benefit, or is that available to everyone, or how does that work?
Sure. So severance is a payment amount. It's compensation that you're not necessarily entitled to. It's an amount that's given by a company after you leave, that it's typically not a part of your wages. There are some executives and there's some companies that will pay severance pay. These are typically seen in executive employment agreements.
Hmm.
Most rank and file employees do not, outside of the C-suite, so CFO, CEO, CTO, most don't have a severance, a contract that promises to pay severance when you leave. So a severance pay is typically pay that's given in exchange for something else. If you have a contract that promises to pay severance pay upon your departure, then you are entitled to the severance, but that's not the case typically. So if you're a rank and file employee, typically not a member of the C-suite, severance pay is typically given when you have filed a complaint against the company or there's some wrongful action that's happened. You can think of it as a settlement payment. So it's payment that the company is giving you in exchange for your agreement not to file any claims against the company. Some employees are given severance pay when they're being terminated as a matter of course. So if you are being laid off, for example, and you might be asked to sign a severance agreement that promises to pay you a certain amount that you would not otherwise be entitled to in exchange for your promise not to file any claims against the company. In the past, and these particular provisions have been scrutinized this year, but in the past, non-disparagement and confidentiality provisions were in severance agreements. And so companies would require employees not to disparage the company and to maintain the terms of a severance agreement, to maintain the confidentiality of those terms. Now, the National Labor Relations Board has come out and said those provisions are unlawful. So this is actually a really hot topic in employment law because for as long as I've practiced, and only this year has the National Labor Relations Board taken a very firm stance on these particular provisions. But they have been in severance agreements as long as I've practiced. And so
wow.
this is really a watershed moment for these particular provisions. This might change over the next several years as courts really interpret the National Labor Relations Board's stance on these provisions. But going back to your question, how do you request severance pay? Typically, lawyers do. Typically, if a potential client has described by potential violations of law, and the lawyer thinks that there is a potential violation of law and they are planning to file a claim on behalf of a potential client, they will ask on behalf of their clients. They'll ask for severance pay, and they'll ask for a certain amount in exchange for the potential client leaving the company. And so it really is an assessment for the company as to how much risk there is. Is this employee going to present a risk to the company of potential litigation?
So could this be seen as kind of like a settlement, like a preliminary settlement?
It is.
Before it goes to arbitration or anything?
That's really the way to think of it, as a settlement, in exchange for the employees giving up the right to sue the company for a workplace violation. And the company is giving up they're paying the employee in exchange for a release of claims.
Gotcha. And so then, as an attorney, do you think there's any specific terms one should prioritize in a severance agreement to get the most out of the deal?
Yeah, so it is going to depend on each employee's individual situation as to what they ask for and what takes priority in the terms. But of course, the amount, how much how much severance pay will the company give the employee in exchange for their release of claims? So if the employee is really, really dedicated to filing a complaint against the company, it might take some convincing with a higher monetary amount in order for the employee to release their claims, because they are giving up the right to file any claims based on their workplace situation. So thinking about how long the employee has been there, the longer an employee has been at the company, the more severance pay, as a rule of thumb, the employee should ask for. If the employee's only been at the company for a month, unless something really egregious has happened while the employee is at the company, asking for 5 years of severance pay is a bit unreasonable.
Right. So would severance be like the full salary or a potential, what is that based off of? Do you know?
So when I say a year of severance pay, that's typically a year of their salary. severance pay, if someone has a severance policy, a rule of thumb is for 2 weeks of pay for every year that they've been at the company. And so if the potential employee has suffered from just a major violation, and one can, when I think of major violations, I certainly think of assault, sexual assault in particular. I think that is going to be a really egregious violation.
Sure.
And so that would justify a higher severance amount for the employee to release claims against the company. And so that's one potential factor. So a major potential factor, because the employee may want to just go on with their life. They may not want to be embroiled in some long litigation that is, really, that has uncertainty surrounding it. They may just really want
Expenses, rake over the
finality.
coals, dragged out. Yeah.
Exactly. They may just want finality. They may just want to go on with their lives. And so that is something that is always important to consider. How much would it take for you to be able to go on with your life, knowing you may not have another job lined up? So that's an analysis that the employee has to think about. How much do you need to really transition to your next opportunity? How many out of pocket expenses have you incurred? Have you incurred, therapy expenses? Have you incurred, other expenses because of the workplace situation that you've endured that the company should reimburse you for? So that's something to consider. Attorney's fees. How much in attorney's fees have you incurred based on this particular situation? Is there any job placement assistance that the company can offer you to help you move into your next role? Can you be on administrative leave for a period of time? Can you negotiate that so that you don't have to interface with the people that may have caused your bad workplace situation, but you can still be an employee of the company, maintaining your benefits for a certain amount of time? And speaking of benefits, will the company pay for your COBRA premium? So when you leave a company, there is the COBRA Act that entitles you to a continuation of your healthcare benefits. So those premiums are very high.
Right. For a
And so
cost. Yeah.
very much
Yeah.
so. So will the company pay those premiums to allow you and your dependents to maintain your insurance coverage while you're looking for another job? So those are just a few of the monetary and non-monetary asks that you can make. But let's see, a neutral reference is something that's pretty common. Most companies do provide a neutral reference. But you may want to ask for a person who knows you well. You might want to ask the company if that person can provide you with a reference in the future. That's
Gotcha.
that's based on their honest assessment.
That's important. That's
For
one
sure.
people wouldn't necessarily think about,
Indeed.
right? 'Cause that's the first question you get asked in a job interview, references. And
Exactly. So who in the company can you still go to, and can you still talk
yeah,
to in the event that the company doesn't want you talking to anyone?
which is always a fear too. Anybody that has a workers' comp case pending, maybe can repel future employers, right?
Um,
On a practical level. Yeah.
can you ask your question one more time?
Well, I'm just saying, like, for somebody, if they have an active workers' comp case or something going on, that could potentially repel future employers. If they catch wind of that, or if they call and they find out why did you leave, and all that dynamic. So a neutral reference could be helpful.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And also, when it comes to disparagement, the non-disparagement provisions that are now under scrutiny by the National Labor Relations Board, you may want the company not to disparage you. And so in the past, you could ask for mutual non-disparagement, but no longer can, at least under this regime of the National Labor Relations Board, can you ask that for mutual non-disparagement. You can ask that the company cannot ask you not to disparage them, but there may be certain people within the company that you don't want, or that you're concerned about providing disparaging remarks towards you. So there may be still the possibility that you can ask that specific people not disparage you.
Oh, that's interesting. That's good to know.
But the mutuality It's going to actually hurt the employer can no longer say you cannot disparage us,
Hmm.
at least under this
Interesting. Yeah.
regime, which may change with a new National Labor Relations Board, and if the court changes the interpretation that the National Labor Relations Board has given to the National Labor Relations Act.
Gotcha. Since we're talking about severance, do you happen to know if severance pay has any implications for things like unemployment benefits or disability benefits if somebody's applying for those things?
So you cannot require someone not to file for unemployment. That's
Hmm.
unemployment retaliation. You cannot do that. The Unemployment Commission can and does require that all employees report any severance pay that they are given as as a condition of leaving the company. So it's important that employees always honestly report any and all severance pay that they have been given. So employees can still typically apply for unemployment, but their unemployment benefits will be offset by any severance pay that they are given. And
Gotcha.
in terms of disability pay, I can't say I don't think that there's any prohibition against disability pay from a severance agreement. I haven't seen that arise in my practice.
Okay. Thank you. I was just curious because I know sometimes people are worried about those things, because this gets really confusing,
Sure, sure.
especially with Social Security, assets
Indeed.
and you can't have this and you can't have this much in your bank
I think it's
account. And
important just to
yeah,
honestly report any
yeah,
and all pay to
yeah,
any, regulatory agency. It's
for
always
sure.
important just to make sure that you are disclosing, the benefits that you're getting, because
Absolutely.
you don't want any liability for failure to disclose.
All right. And then like, oh, you owe us back this much money. That's a bad situation to be in.
Absolutely.
So I know we kind of drove past it. So before somebody reaches the point where they're ready to leave, to throw in the towel, or even necessarily file a complaint with their employer, the issue of bullying, right? What would you say are some of the tools somebody can use if they feel like they're in that position, whether being bullied or it's moving in that direction? How can they kind of stop that in its tracks, do you think?
Yeah. So if you're feeling bullied rather, it's extremely important to make sure you let the person know. The silence is going to be what allows the bullying to continue. So making sure that you communicate with examples, because we've all heard of gaslighting. So you
Mm-hmm.
don't, I think being gaslit basically, and that just means someone not believing you or turning the mirror on you, saying how could you possibly believe that, making you feel belittled or
Mm-hmm.
belittling you for raising a concern. So making sure that you're empowered when you do raise the issue is important. So, and you can do that by just documenting when you felt bullied, the examples of bullying. So it's not, you don't go through the analysis paralysis of wondering, is this bullying? Is this not bullying? But when you have it on paper and you can actually see the chronology of what's
Mm-hmm.
been said to you, how it made you feel, you are no longer second guessing yourself, because that second guessing process takes away your own power to speak up for yourself, because you're wondering, is this really happening to me? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's a common question. Is this really happening? But when you see it on paper, when you've noted it, you then can confirm to yourself that it actually has happened. So after that process, going to the person and saying, whether it's an email, whether it is face to face, whether it's in text message, but really going to them and saying, this is what has been happening to me. And it's making me feel X way. It's making me feel less confident. It's making me feel intimidated. I don't feel like I can do my work in a way that's productive because I'm afraid my psychological safety is being impaired by this behavior. That's critical. So, having this conversation, remembering that the conversation will probably be uncomfortable. So,
Mm-hmm.
you can have this conversation with the understanding it's going to be uncomfortable, but stick to the facts. if you stick to the facts as you have them, it's easier for you to have that conversation because it's your lived experience. And the
Sure.
person
And
may not, they may not agree with your interpretation of what's happened, but you communicating that it's happened, and then bringing in a third party who can address the behavior, it's important.
absolutely. And took the words right out of my mouth. And, some things never change, and bullying is a salient issue from the preschool playground to the workplace as adults. And fortunately, the methods to work, address it are the same too, right? Communication, right? Specifics, you know, assertive communication, right? Uh, Chain of authority, all that stuff, right?
Definitely.
And definitely, if it goes unchecked, it continues, right? It's
Definitely.
definitely worth speaking up about and doing it in an effective way, right?
Exactly. And an organization may have resources to help the person who is the perpetrator of the bullying, so that there may be coaching available, communication coaching available. There may be other resources, just counseling available to help that person articulate whatever they're trying to articulate in a way that is less offensive, less aggressive, more in congruence with the policies and culture of the organization. And there may simply be communication differences
Mm-hmm.
between the person who is reporting the behavior and the person who is delivering the communication. So, recognizing those differences and communicating in a way that everyone feels comfortable is something that really can save a workplace
Sure.
relationship.
Oh yeah, and I know, any organization cares about the workplace culture because if the culture is out of whack, productivity takes a dive and there's problems and so to keep everybody happy, communication is key,
It's
right?
key.
Yeah,
And it
communication is key.
seems very simple. It seems very easy, but bringing those conversations to the fore can be extremely difficult for the person who has to tell the bullier, that they don't feel comfortable, because you never
Mm-hmm.
want to be perceived as a whiner or someone
Mm-hmm.
who is weak. But it's not weak to express your feelings. It's
Mm-hmm.
not, if your workplace productivity is being affected, if your mental health is being affected, you shouldn't have to work in fear, especially if
Absolutely.
a conversation, although it might be awkward, although it might be scary to have at first, if that can salvage a relationship and make your workplace more comfortable, then it's absolutely necessary that you have that conversation.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This has just been a wealth of information. I would love to hear how you're doing down the road. If
Thank
you want to
you.
keep us abreast on your book and your book launch and everything, you're always welcome back on. You're, like I said, just a great resource, for
Thank
this
you so
subject.
much.
It is a hot one, and workplace stress and employment issues, and that's always going to be a thing, you know?
Indeed. I hope that, Patrick, we can get to a point where workplaces are all places that have wonderful cultures. I think if we start with workplaces, amongst other places, but workplaces in particular, if we can start building beautiful cultures there, I think we would have a better world.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. And definitely, I think in the spirit of workplace culture, if you know what you're looking for, even if you're leaving a bad situation, if you have a better filter moving forward, the questions to ask in a job interview, what red flags, right, to look out for, those things. And you never really know until you're like knee deep in the water, right, until what you're dealing with. But it's always good to work on your filter, your compass, how you're assessing future employers and how you interview them to kind of tease out these things and seeing, is just a company that cares about culture at all. those those are important things to kind of put your feelers out for, right?
1000%. To the extent that you can really suss out red flags at the outset,
Mm-hmm.
try your best. But often you don't know until you start working, and really dealing with workplace conflict.
Exactly. And the whole takeaway message here is that anyone can empower themselves with the right information, the right resources, and there's never any shame in leaving a bad or toxic situation, right? As is true with relationships, work, right? Mental health is our priority for sure, right? Live to fight another day,
Absolutely.
right? So this is your book for anyone who wants to grab it. Leaving a Toxic Workplace on Your Own Terms. Peace by Jessica Childress. And so definitely check that out. The Kindle one is up and available. The hard copy
For
is rolling
pre-sale.
out later. Yeah, first sale, sorry, pre-sale. Absolutely. So check that out, everyone. And without further ado, you have a fantastic, wonderful week. If you're celebrating Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
And you take it easy. Thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Oh